It began with a silence no one expected. Not the hush of peace, but the kind of silence that makes your heart race. A silence that whispers something is about to change forever. For Kate and William, that silence would become the beginning of their most heartbreaking farewell. Let's begin the story. The evening began like any other, bathed in a soft golden glow that spilled across the quiet rooms of their home. Outside, the world hummed faintly, a breeze brushing against the windows. The distant sound of birds retreating into the fading light. Inside, everything seemed calm. To calm. Kate sat curled into the corner of the sofa, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. The gentle steam had disappeared minutes ago, but she held on to it as if it were an anchor keeping her tethered to something real. Across from her, William leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on her but pretending not to watch too closely. He knew her well enough to recognize that something was stirring beneath her silence. They had shared many evenings like this, evenings filled with laughter, quiet stories, stolen glances, but tonight, there was something missing. The warmth that usually lingered between them seemed to have drained away, leaving behind only an unsettling emptiness. William cleared his throat softly, an attempt to bridge the space between them. "Long day?" he asked gently, as though afraid to break the fragile quiet. Kate looked up, startled, as if she'd been far away. Her lips curved into a smile, but it wasn't the kind of smile he knew. It was faint, painted on, as if she'd borrowed it just to keep him from asking more questions. "Yes," she replied, her voice thin, the sound barely grazing the air before disappearing into the silence again. But William didn't believe her. He knew that voice, the one she used when she wanted to hide something. He shifted in his chair, studying her pale face. The way her eyes avoided his gaze. How her fingers trembled slightly around the teacup. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The clock ticked softly on the mantel, each second stretching longer than it should. The weight of the silence between them grew heavier, pressing against the walls of the room, until William felt it in his chest. It wasn't peaceful silence. It was the kind that suffocates, the kind that whispers secrets in a language you can't yet understand. He leaned forward, his voice quieter this time, more insistent. "Kate, talk to me. What's on your mind?" She looked at him then, really. Looked at him, and for a flicker of a moment, he saw something raw in her eyes, fear. Not the kind that came from sudden shocks or simple worries, but a deep, lingering fear that had been gnawing at her for longer than she cared to admit. It made his stomach tighten. But just as quickly, she blinked, and the look was gone. She turned away, setting the teacup down on the table with careful precision, as though focusing on the smallest detail could keep her from unraveling. "I'm fine," she said softly. Too softly. William wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the woman sitting in front of him wasn't fine at all. He saw the way her shoulders curved inward, the way her breath caught when she thought he wasn't watching, the way she seemed to be folding into herself, piece by fragile piece. The silence stretched again. It felt alive now, creeping into every corner of the room, wrapping itself around them, pulling them apart inch by inch. William stood and crossed the short distance between them. He sat down beside her, reaching for her hand. Her skin felt cold against his, colder than it should. He tightened his grip gently, hoping to draw her back to him. "Kate," he said firmly, "this time, I know you. Something's wrong. Please, don't shut me out." Her lips parted as if she might finally say it, but instead, she pressed them together again. Her eyes shimmered, glassy, and William felt his heart clench. He tried again. You don't have to carry it alone. Whatever it is, let me share it. The air grew heavier still. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling faintly against the glass, as though the world itself leaned in to listen. Kate's hand trembled in his, and for a long time, she said nothing. The silence roared between them, louder than any words could be. William's mind raced. Was she ill? Was it something to do with the children? Was there a shadow over their lives he hadn't seen until now? Then, at last, she drew in a shaky breath. Her lips trembled as if the words she wanted to say weighed too much for her to carry. Her eyes darted toward him, filled with a sorrow that made his chest ache. William, she whispered, her voice breaking. It was just his name, but it carried with it the gravity of something she had been holding back. Something that had the power to change everything. He leaned closer, his pulse thundering in his ears. I'm here, he said quickly, urgently. What is it? Her throat worked as she swallowed hard, and her fingers clutched his hand tighter, as though she feared that if she let go, she would fall into pieces. There's something. Her voice cracked again, and she paused. Eyes filling with tears, she fought to keep from falling. There's something I haven't told you. The words hung in the air, like a blade suspended above them both. Sharp and merciless. And then silence. The kind of silence that stretched into his bones, that made the hair at the back of his neck rise. The kind that whispered of storms yet to come. William stared at her, his heart hammering, his mind whirling with possibilities too dark to name. He wanted to speak, to demand answers, but something inside him told him not to. Not yet. Because whatever she was about to say would change everything. The chapter of their lives that began with a golden evening was about to end in shadows. And William knew, deep in his gut, that this was only the beginning. The silence lingered. Long after Kate's trembling words, William's mind spun in frantic circles, but his hand remained steady on hers, clinging as though his grip alone might hold her together. The lamplight cast long shadows across the room, stretching over their faces, painting everything in hues of sorrow. Kate's lips quivered as she drew in a shaky breath, her chest rising and falling unevenly. For a moment, William thought she might stay silent again, burying whatever truth she carried. But then, as if the weight of her secret was too much to bear, she finally let it spill. I'm sick, William, she whispered, her voice breaking. Like glass. I've been sick for a while. And it's getting worse. The words crashed over him like a wave, dragging him under. He blinked, unable to move, unable to think. The world tilted. The air seemed to vanish from the room. No. The word tore from his throat before he could stop it. He shook his head, his grip on her hand tightening. No, Kate, you can't mean. Her eyes glistened with tears, but she did not look away. She held his gaze, steady in her pain. I didn't want to tell you. I thought I could fight it quietly, that I could spare you. But I can't hide it anymore. The truth is, my body is failing me. William felt something inside him fracture. It wasn't just far, it was grief, raw and sudden, as if he'd already lost something, even though she was still right there in front of him. He pulled her into his arms, holding her, as though the force of his embrace might keep her safe. But even as he clung to her, he knew it couldn't shield her from what was already inside. You should have told me. He whispered against her hair, his voice hoarse. We could have faced it together from the beginning. Kate let out a broken laugh, one laced with tears. I couldn't. I saw the way you looked at me every day with hope, with strength. I couldn't bear to see that hope fade. I wanted us to have at least a little more time of pretending everything was normal. Her words sliced him open. He remembered the past weeks, her pale complexion, the moments she disappeared into herself, the weight she seemed to carry. And he remembered the little ways she had smiled through it, hiding the truth, holding it all inside as he held her. Memories began to flood him unbidden. Kate, laughing on their wedding day, sunlight spilling across her veil, her hand in his as they stood together, watching their children take their first steps. The quiet evenings on the balcony, the two of them sharing dreams, whispering secrets in the dark. Those flashes of happiness, so vivid, struck him harder than any blow, because now they were shadows against the cruel reality she had confessed. He pulled back slightly, searching her face. What do the doctors say? His voice trembled, despite his efforts to sound strong. Kate hesitated, then lowered her eyes. They don't know how much time I have. Weeks, maybe months. I didn't want to hear it. I still don't. But I can't keep it from you anymore. The weight of her words pressed against him, until it felt impossible to breathe. Yet he forced himself to sit straighter, to be the pillar she needed. Inside, though, he was breaking. 1,000 cracks splintered through his heart, each one cutting deeper with the thought of losing her. Kate, he said firmly, though his voice trembled. You are not alone in this. We'll fight it together, whatever it takes. You hear me? Her lips curved into a sad smile. Always the fighter. Always trying to save me. I'm not trying, he whispered fiercely. I will. The silence that followed wasn't the suffocating silence of before. It was heavy, yes, but filled with something new, a fragile thread of defiance binding them together. Still, the reality lingered. They couldn't escape it, couldn't pretend anymore. How do we tell the children? Kate's voice broke as she asked the question neither of them wanted to face. William felt his heart wrench. He pictured their little faces, innocent, trusting, unprepared for the kind of truth that would shatter their world. We'll find the right words, he said softly, though the idea of speaking them aloud felt impossible. But not tonight. Tonight, it's just us. Kate nodded, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. He reached up and wiped them gently, his thumb lingering against her skin. The hours stretched, each minute carved with sorrow. They spoke little. After that, sitting in the dim glow of the room, their hands entwined, their hearts heavy with what lay ahead. Eventually, darkness settled fully around them. The house grew still, save for the faint rhythm of the clock. William lay beside her, unwilling to let her go, his arm draped protectively over her. She turned to face him, her voice fragile. I'm so sorry, William. He pressed his forehead to hers, closing his eyes. Don't you dare apologize. None of this is your fault. His voice broke, but he steadied it quickly. We'll face this together, no matter what. The words carried the weight of a vow, binding him to her, in the shadows of truth. And as the night deepened, William held her tighter. Knowing that tomorrow would demand strength neither of them felt they had, but tonight, at least, they had each. The days that followed were a blur of shadows and stolen light. William moved through them with the sharp awareness of a man clinging to something precious he was terrified of losing. Kate's illness had moved from hidden whispers inside her body to an undeniable reality. Each morning, when he woke beside her, he noticed the changes, the paleness in her cheeks, the way her steps grew slower, how her once effortless grace seemed weighed down by invisible chains. And yet, she smiled. She smiled for him, for their children, for the world outside, that continued to watch them without ever knowing the storm raging in their home. William hated those smiles. Not because they weren't beautiful, they were, because he could see the pain stitched beneath them. He wanted to rip the sickness away from her, to take it into himself, to fight it on her behalf. Instead, he could only watch as it claimed more of her strength with every passing day. At night, when the house fell silent, William allowed himself to break. Alone in their bedroom, with the shadows for company, he would press his fists against his eyes to muffle his sobs, desperate not to wake her. He had promised her strength, but strength came at a cost, and his was draining. Bleeding out in the hours when no one could see, the family rallied around them. Kate's mother often arrived with warm meals, even though Kate barely had the appetite for them. Her sister slipped in and out quietly, always carrying a softness in her presence, as though afraid that even the sound of her footsteps might disturb Kate's fragile calm. Their children were shielded, though not entirely. They asked questions. Was Mummy so tired? Why did Daddy look so sad when he thought they weren't watching? William gave them answers that skirted the truth, telling himself that protecting their innocence a little longer was an act of love. But silence had its own cruelty. It was Kate who insisted on one final trip, a fleeting attempt to reclaim the fragments of their old life. She spoke of it one evening as they sat together by the fire, her voice thin but her eyes bright with determination. "Let's take the children to the coast," she said softly. "Just once more. Before things become harder." The pause in her words sliced through him. She didn't need to finish the sentence. William felt it all the same. He wanted to protest, to protect her from the exhaustion such a trip would bring. But then he saw the spark in her expression. It wasn't the spark of sickness, nor sorrow, it was hope. Fragile, fleeting, but real. He couldn't take that from her, so they went. The seaside stretched wide and endless before them, the waves crashing against the shore like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Their children laughed, chasing one another across the sand, their shrieks carried high into the salt-filled air. For a time, it was almost easy to forget. Kate wore a scarf wrapped carefully around her head, the wind tugging at it playfully. She held William's arm as they walked slowly along the shoreline, her steps uneven, her breath shallow. But she smiled, truly smiled as she watched the children draw shapes in the wet sand. "Do you remember when we came here years ago?" she asked, her voice lifted by the sound of the sea. William nodded, his mind conjuring the memory instantly. The two of them, younger then, running barefoot through the waves, laughing until their sides ached. That day, the future had felt infinite, wide as the horizon. "Yes," he said softly. "I remember everything." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them, the crash of the sea, the cries of their children, the warmth of her body pressed against his. He wanted to freeze that moment, to bottle it, and keep it forever. They had a picnic on the sand. The children devoured their food eagerly, the crumbs scattering into the wind, while Kate picked at her meal. William noticed, but he said nothing. He laughed with them, told stories, tickled the little ones until their giggles rang out across the shore. For that afternoon, he played the part of the man he used to be, the man who believed tomorrow was a promise. Not a question, but beneath it all, every smile carried a shadow. William caught it in the way Kate's laughter faded too quickly, in the way her eyes lingered on their children a little longer than usual, memorizing them as though she feared she might not see them grow. As the sun dipped low, painting the horizon in streaks of orange and crimson, Kate sat on a blanket, her hands folded in her lap. She gazed at the sea with a stillness that unsettled him. "It feels like the waves are saying goodbye," she murmured, almost to herself. William swallowed hard, his throat thick. "No," he said, forcing steadiness into his tone. "They're saying, we'll see you again." She smiled faintly, but didn't argue. By the time they returned home, she was exhausted. William helped her into bed, tucking the blankets around her carefully, his movements tender, reverent. She gave him that soft, weary smile, the one that always undid him. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For today. For pretending. With me." William pressed a kiss to her forehead, unable to trust his voice to answer. That night, sleep eluded him. He lay awake, staring into the darkness, every muscle in his body taut with helplessness. He had promised her strength, but strength felt like a cruel illusion when all he could do was watch her fade. At some point, exhaustion claimed him. But when he stirred awake in the depth of night, he found the space beside him empty. Panic shot through him as he sat up, scanning the room. Then he saw her, by the window. Kate stood wrapped in a blanket, her frail figure outlined against the pale glow of the moon. Her shoulders shook silently as she stared at the stars above, tears slipping down her cheeks unchecked. William's chest tightened. He rose quietly, crossing the room, each step heavy with dread and love. He didn't speak at first. He simply slipped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin gently against her hair. She startled, then leaned into him, her silent sobs breaking against his chest. He looked past her, to the vast sky outside, where the stars glittered cold and distant. And in that moment, William realized that even the brightest constellations seemed dim compared to the woman in his arms. And the thought of losing her made the night feel endless. Neither of them spoke. The silence between them was filled with everything they didn't need to say, and as he held her there, beneath the weight of the heavens, William knew this was the struggle within, the fight to keep going, even as the darkness crept ever closer. The house was quiet, too quiet. It was the kind of quiet that pressed against the walls, that echoed in the hearts of everyone inside. Even the ticking clock seemed to hesitate, as though it, too, feared to disturb the fragile stillness that had settled over everything. Kate lay in the bed, the soft sheets drawn up around her frail body. Her skin had grown pale, almost translucent, her breath shallow and uneven. The illness had taken so much from her, her strength, her voice, her laughter, but it had not touched her eyes. They still shone, faint but fierce, filled with love. With memories, with the silent goodbyes she had no strength left to say. William sat at her side, his hand wrapped firmly around hers. His thumb traced gentle circles against her skin, as if by sheer will he could keep her tethered to him. His eyes were swollen, raw from nights spent weeping into the silence, but now there were no tears left. Only a hollow ache that burned in his chest like fire. The family gathered close. Her mother in the corner, silent, her lips pressed together in a prayer she could not voice. Her sister clutching the arm of the chair, as though it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing. The children too young to truly understand, but old enough to feel the heaviness in the room, huddled quietly. Their wide eyes searching for reassurance that no one could give. William leaned closer, his voice a whisper in the stillness. "Do you remember, Kate, our first dance?" Her eyes flickered to him, faint light glistening through her tears. A small, slow blink answered him. He smiled, though it broke him to do so. You were so nervous, you kept stepping on my shoes. And I told you it didn't matter, because all I cared about was having you in my arms. Do you remember? Her lips trembled, though no sound came. A single tear slid from the corner of her eye. He pressed his forehead to her hand, closing his eyes. Do you remember the children's first Christmas? The way you stayed up all night, wrapping gifts and baking biscuits because you wanted it to be magical. And it was, Kate. It was magical because of you. His voice wavered, but he pressed on. He filled the silence with their life, reliving every moment, every joy, every sorrow. He spoke of laughter in the rain, of quiet nights beneath the stars, of secrets whispered in the dark when the world was asleep. And though she could not answer, her eyes told him she remembered it all. He lifted his head, brushing his hand tenderly along her cheek. You gave me everything. You are everything. And I don't know how to let you go. Her gaze locked with his then, steady, filled with a love so deep it made the room seem to collapse around them. Her fingers twitched faintly in his grasp, the smallest squeeze, but it was enough. Enough to say what her lips could not. I love you always. The air grew heavier. Her breathing slowed, each one shallower than the last. The silence thickened, pressing down like a storm, and everyone in the room seemed to feel it. William bent close again, his tears falling onto her pillow. It's okay, he whispered, his voice breaking. If you're tired, you can rest now. I'll carry you with me, always. I promise. Her eyes lingered on his, softening, and then drifted past him, toward the window, toward the faint shimmer of stars beyond. And then so slowly, so gently it happened. Her hand, once clinging to his, slipped loose. The warmth that had always been hers ebbed away, leaving only stillness behind. The silence that followed was deafening. It was not the silence of waiting, not the silence of secrets. It was final. It was farewell. William froze, his body trembling as though the earth itself had given way beneath him. He held her hand tightly, refusing to let go, even as he felt the truth settle in his bones. No, he whispered, shaking his head. His lips brushed her knuckles. No, please. But the silence gave no answer. Around him, sobs broke the stillness. Her mother collapsed into her sister's arms. The children began to cry, their small voices breaking with confusion and grief. The room filled with the sound of mourning, but for William, it was the silence that screamed the loudest. He bowed his head over her hand, clutching it as though he could anchor her spirit to him. His tears fell freely now, unstoppable. His shoulders shook with the weight of sorrow, too heavy for words. And yet, through the despair, he whispered to her still, his voice raw but certain, I'll love you forever. You're still here. Always here. The family gathered closer, surrounding him, their cries mingling into one shared grief. Together, they wept, their tears falling like rain onto the stillness Kate had left behind, in that room. Silence became the loudest sound of all, the silence of a love that had ended in this world but would echo forever in the hearts of those who had shared it. And William, holding her hand one last time, knew that though her voice was gone, though her touch had slipped away, Kate's farewell would never truly be silent. It lived on in every memory, every breath, every star that shone above them that night.